Remembrance Day is upon us, and how each of us remembers is something personal to each and every one of us. For my friend Kim Walker, it is about going to gravestones, grave markers, graveyards across Europe that, well, mark the places where many Canadian soldiers lie. Hello, I'm Brian Lilley, political columnist for the Toronto Sun, and joining me today is Kim Walker. We've talked to Kim before, talked to her about her project, CanadaRemembersGuide.com, and Kim, I just wanted to have you back on because you've been to Italy, marking out the where so many Canadian soldiers are buried, and I'll explain in a moment why Italy and the Italian campaign is very personal to me. But first, let's back up a bit and talk about what the Canada Remembers Guide is for people that haven't heard about this before. You make it easy and simple for Canadians who are in Europe to go and pay their respects. Take a bit of time out of a trip that's already there um, to say, let's go and see a bit of history. Let's honor those who died for what we now have in value.
Thank you for having me, Brian. It's great to see you again. And you gave a great summary about what I am trying to do, what my goals are. And it is exactly that. I decided a couple of years ago that I wanted to find a way to make it easier for Canadians to go and visit all of our cemeteries, memorials, also some of the museums that are in Europe that commemorate the contribution of Canadians to the liberation of Europe in World War I, in the First World War and in the Second World War. So the idea started with just the landing beaches. And I thought, well, if you're in Paris, it's a one-day trip and you can do a loop. And there's a couple of really large Canadian cemeteries there. And if you could spare a second day, Dieppe is a really incredible place that will stay with you for the rest of your life. But it expanded, and people asked, well, what about Vimy, and what about the Netherlands? And my great uncle was there in Apeldoorn, and why don't you add those? And so I have. So there's currently 15 itineraries on the website. So they're all based right now in France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. And there's lots of options for people if they happen to be in Paris, Amsterdam, Antwerp, or Brussels. There's ideas for how you can go out on the road for a day or two and see some cemeteries. Some of them are Canadian cemeteries, meaning everybody in the cemetery is Canadian, and others would be Commonwealth or sometimes called British cemeteries, where we have a lot of Canadian burials as well. So those are the ones I tried to include. And as you can see behind me, I just visited 24 cemeteries in Italy.
Wow. So, like, this started as really a passion project for you. You've told me before you were in your 20s. So, a year or two ago, you were in your 20s and you were in Europe, and you saw some of these sites and it really stuck with you. And then, you're fortunate enough to have spent time in Europe living as part of your career, your husband's career, and you were able to see these things. That must have had a real impact on you, both, in your younger years and then later on as, more of an adult looking around. What drove you to say, I've got to share this with everyone?
Well, it's interesting because I think what happened is I went from being a learner to an observer, somebody who participated a little bit, somebody who visited. And then when I was living in Belgium, a lot of Canadians, their entry point would be Vimy. That's something that a lot of people know. And as I think a lot of your listeners know, that is the Canadian National Memorial in France that commemorates the contribution of Canadians to the liberation of Europe during the First World War, and in particular names every single soldier that was not located. On which it's a very moving tribute. And at that time, I became slowly the guide. So I became the person who could take people there to show them where it was, to say, don't forget the Passchendaele Museum. Here's a cemetery or two that you want to see as well. So over time, I became somebody who, I'm not a historian, although I have learned a lot. I realized my role is just to show people where these places are. I felt that.
Because so many of them, if you're there already, you're going for a family trip, you're going for a business trip, they're not far. You just may not know that they're there.
Exactly. And actually, it's funny you should say that because when I was recently in Italy, there is a cemetery in Rome. And I've been to Rome many times and I did not know that. And so, as part of the research I'm doing, part of it is that to just show that these places exist, make people aware of these places, and then help just with a little simple itinerary map that very simple to say you can do this, and it is well worth doing. And like you said, it's not far from where you already are. And in some cases, like sadly, if in parts of France and Belgium, which are located around where the Western Front was, there are so many cemeteries that you almost don't have to get back in your car to go to the next one.
I I was in Edinburgh a couple of years ago, stumbled across a Commonwealth's Graves Commission site, and of course, Canadians there. A mutual friend of both of ours was telling me the story of stumbling across, like taking a wrong turn and ending up in a Canadian um, uh, graveyard in northern France. These things are there now. The Italian campaign, this is not a Canadian story because my uncle Gerald visited Canada but never moved here. He was in the British Army out of Glasgow. He uh, was taken a prisoner of war, learned Italian while he was a prisoner of war, spent a couple of years there. Uh, but he fought alongside Canadians. He fought alongside Americans in the liberation of Italy, and and so a lot of Canadians do have that connection to the Italian campaign, but we don't think of it in the same way as we do Vimy or Passchendaele or these places that have such uh, l- m- there's a mythology built up around them. So tell me about what you discovered. What was new to you? Because I mean, I'm assuming that these are all Second World War graves. These
Yeah.
aren't First World War graves, as many of the ones in Northern Europe would be.
There were a handful of First World War burials, but you're right, predominantly Second World War. And it's a great question. What did I learn that was different? Um, I did get a much better picture of where the Canadians were. I started in Sicily. And so the Americans and the Canadians were in Sicily, and the part of Sicily that was liberated by Canadians, you can go and sort of drive the route. I actually followed Farley Mowatt's route with his regiment and found some of the towns that he talks about, as well as a large and very beautiful, poignant Canadian cemetery at Agira. Um, but on the mainland of Italy, what I noticed that was a little bit different is that we do have one or two cemeteries that are completely Canadian, especially up along the coast here where we were very active and where there was a lot of, uh, at that time, the relocation of Germans to defend that area. And unfortunately, a lot of loss of life. But what I noticed is in cemeteries throughout Europe that I've been to, and I actually just counted, and I have been to 98 of them. So I can say this is
It's a
a
lot of
comparison. A
cemeteries.
lot of cemeteries, but this is part of the work I want to do is go to every one of them and then try to find out which ones are doable, which ones tell a bit of a story, where can we really understand what happened. And in Italy, in a lot of the cemeteries and a lot of the military cemeteries, the Commonwealth War Graves Commission does maintain all of them. And I have to give a big shout out to them because they do an incredible job. And I consult the database regularly, almost daily. But they, in Italy, buried the Canadians in many of the cemeteries together. So that means, unlike in the First World War, when the war cemeteries are often located for the Commonwealth exactly where the men fell, and that's why some of them have 40, graves, or they're often in the place where the battle might have been really close by. One in Belgium called Maple Copse, which I think about all the time, is just in a little copse of trees, and it's where the battle was, and that's where the cemetery was. Italy is a little bit different in that And it was my pictures when I looked at them are impactful because in the cemetery where, you'll see the plots are organized, like say there'd be 8 plots in a cemetery. Well, 1 or 2 of them will be completely Canadian. So it means you're standing there and you're just surrounded by only the headstones with our maple leaf on them. And it's, it's really quite moving. But it does mean that they were, they would have been, deliberately after the war, buried with their fellow countrymen. The other thing I
What?
learned is that because of the occupation being a little bit later in the war, in the north of Europe, there's history that goes back to the 1939 of struggles and resistance, whereas in Italy it really is 1943, and it's very intense. I went to a couple of one museum in particular in Rome that was in an old prison, and it was dedicated 100% to the Italian resistors. And a lot of almost the entire population of prisoners had been killed in that prison. It's a really incredible, very moving place to go. Still graffiti on the walls and things like that. So it was a different experience. A lot of the places are not, and certainly I think we were talking a little bit earlier, not in touristy areas. You can get there. You're close enough to Florence, Rome, Assisi. There's a beautiful cemetery in Assisi, too, that's very close to Rome. But not always just like not in a town per se. Whereas in Belgium, the town was there and the cemetery's there and the town is still there. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Now, I'm wondering because when we've spoken before, you've talked about you know, s- particularly places like Holland, or some of the coastal towns on France, northern France that Canadians liberated. That there is a true sense of appreciation that they recognize that Canada helped liberate them. Italy, as you said, it's a different story. Like the resistance didn't start until 43. It wasn't years of being occupied by the Nazis. So is there that same connection? Is there that same appreciation? Obviously, a huge connection between Canada and Italy. I'm from Hamilton. My goodness, it's
Completely.
like almost being Italian, being from Hamilton. So is there that connection, that sense of, oh, you're Canadian. Thank you.
Oh, definitely. I would say so. And I would say also, I want to just be clear that I know that there was resistance before 43, but it was obviously to more internal politics.
Against
Yeah.
Mussolini as opposed to against
Exactly,
Hitler. Yes.
exactly. And then obviously then that, the new the resistance changes focus. I think the first of all, the cemeteries are incredibly beautifully maintained. So the Commonwealth War Graves Commission is maintaining all the cemeteries. They have local people, gardeners and such working for them. When I was in the cemetery in Florence, it's a large and very, very, very large cemetery. And when I first went in, I sometimes look ahead to see where I've already located where some of the Canadians are, so I can get to that cemetery, the plot, lay some flags. But when I went in, the gardeners, two of the gardeners came right up to me right away, and I was carrying Canadian flags. And in my non-existent Italian and their, broken English and lots of hand signals, they took me to where the Canadians were. And they
Wow.
stayed with me until I saw every single one of them. And then they said, over here, over here, over here. And it was really incredible. It was incredibly kind, and they were very respectful, and they were, um, without saying thank you, I was thanked. We were thanked. It felt really special. Yeah.
Wow, that is incredibly touching, incredibly moving. Kim, I hope to take advantage of your itinerary soon. I have not yet, but I will. In the meantime, I will encourage everyone, if you are there, if you are going, CanadaRemembersGuide.com. Check them out. Consider it. 1 day guide, 2 day guide, more. Just check it out and consider doing it, especially as we sit here and discuss on Remembrance Day. Thanks so much, Kim.
Thank you. I appreciate the time.
Let us know what you think. Share your thoughts on this in the comments below. Share this on social media, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel.